Well, happy Friday, everyone. December the 16th, 2022 is almost behind us. Today is the REIA Now update, and we're going to have some legislative updates from our COO, Charles Tassell. And then we are hoping also to have Jorge Newbery, the founder and CEO of preREO, that's going to be talking to you guys about a new service of purchasing mortgages directly from institutions around the country. So with that, I'm going to turn over to our executive director, Rebecca McLean.
Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us for our last update of the season. We really appreciate that you've stuck with us through the whole year, and we've got some really exciting content that we plan to bring to you next year. So make sure that you stay tuned and on the lookout for that. As Ryan said, we do have great guests today. One of them may be having a little bit of a family emergency, so we will keep you updated. But until then, Charles will do a legislative update. But just to remind you, especially if our speaker makes it onto the call today, even though we may be talking about financial and legal topics, we are not experts in the field. And if you have those questions, you need to find a professional in your area that can give you information specific to your situation. We are here, though, to promote, protect, and educate, and we've been doing so for almost 40 years now, if you can believe that. We have about 120 local affiliates spread across almost every state, with over 40,000 members that belong to National REIA at the local level. These programs are sponsored by Home Depot Pro, and they also bring to us very special offerings through your membership at your local REIA. One of those, probably the most popular, being the discount on paint that you get right at the register. You also get some rebates, and we have other special programs designed to help you as an investor. You need to be affiliated with a local organization to be able to do that. And to find the local organization in your area, you can just come onto the National REIA site at nationalrea.org. You can then click on I'm an investor, and then here on the find a local REIA button, and you can find the group that is closest to your area. That way you can connect and keep up with all the local information, whether it be legislative, industry updates, or just get those benefits that are both national and local related. But Charles, I will now then hand this over to you, sir, and you can give us an update on what's happening legislatively.
Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy holidays here. Welcome. So I'd almost rather stay with the Kris Kringle process, because the alternatives are, well, I've been broken record since December of last year saying, look, guys, we've got log jams. The government is still, I was going to say functioning. It's still running. Be glad you don't get all the government you pay for. Let's just put it that way. Kevin, having been served in the government, you understand what I'm saying there. Folks, right now, it's continuing resolutions. The lame duck is still flopping around and will continue to do so. There's a couple of things coming out of the House that are basically focused on military housing. Not much else has changed. We're really looking for what's going to happen in the beginning of the new year. I mentioned that. Speaking of, one of the things I will mention is March 28th and 29th, we will have more information about this coming, but probably in some of the January edition material. But March 28th and 29th, we will be on the Hill, joining with National Apartment Association for Advocate, which will be, going up to the Hill, speaking with our congressman there. And everything I've been told is that with the new administration, there will be actual access into the halls of Congress again, as we've been used to pre-COVID. So hopefully things will open up. If you want to start kind of thinking about in terms of being able to be in DC for the 28th and 29th, that would be great. Again, this is not necessarily an all-member call, like we all have to rush there with pitchforks and torches. This is if you'd like to participate in the legislative process, absolutely. Love to be able to do that, and just invite you if you're interested in it. We'll go through some training. We work with NAA and doing some training and some updates, and we'll provide a variety of talking points for you and speaking points to go forward. And then from there, we can, go up to the Hill, ideally have meetings with at least staff members, if not the congressmen themselves and go from there. So that's the majority of what I have for you right now. It's like I said, it's not a heavy load in the sense of here's all the issues going on, because right now, and I reached out to a couple different lobbyists and a couple different organizations and said, what are you hearing right now? And they're like, it's a fire hose. And I'm hearing, 417 different answers, and they're all saying, I want a hippopotamus for Christmas, basically, which is I want what I want. And if I don't get it, I'm going to go pout and storm and throw a fit. And hence the reason they're just delaying and pushing the continuing resolution back. There's full expectation that will get done probably next week. There will be a lot of drama. And with Christmas coming, there will be a good incentive for them to get it done more quickly. But having said that, just hold on, get through the holidays. And I will mention something, and we've written about this in the past. Please take that time between Christmas and New Year, and please, please, please make sure your computers are backed up. Make sure your all your virus checks and everything are in place. I would encourage you to, if you don't have backups, please put them in place. Take some of that time to do that. We are seeing an incredible spike of attacks, and the expectation is there may be even more. Other parts of the world know that the US kind of goes on holiday, and from about the 20th on, our productivity isn't necessarily focused and going forward. So the attacks will be coming in even more so. So please make sure you are on it, whether it's phishing, spear phishing, all of those kind of things. And you understand what I mean by phishing, PH, not FI. I like to go FI phishing, but the PH phishing could be very expensive. And if you don't have backups of your computer material, it could be really bad for you. So for your business sake, for your sanity's sake, going into 23, please take the time during this New Year period or pre-New Year period to do that. It will save you a ton of stress going forward. So that's the urge, and that's kind of a Homeland Security, FBI approach. They're encouraging that this time of year. Might I add that they just got hacked themselves, but just so you know, you think, well, I'm just a little person or whatever. Let me tell you, it all gets sold on the dark web, and there are people going after us. There are bad actors coming after all of us, whether it's the FBI or a small business owner. If somebody thinks they can get money out of you, or they're just putting mischief out there, it's being done right now. And a lot of that is state actor funded behind the scenes. So please take a little while and do that. So I'll get off that soapbox. But with that, recently I had the great honor and privilege of reconnecting with a friend of mine. Jorge Newbery and I have worked together in the past. We worked on a variety of projects, and George spoke at Node Expo recently, and he spoke in with two different hats on. And one was it was a heart-to-heart directly to investors. And George, I'm going to ask you to kind of give the 3 to 5 minute version of that heart-to-heart on, in part because as we come into the Christmas season, and folks, all of us know that evictions are, let's face it, it's brutal. It's the worst part of our job. If we have to do it, nobody wants to go in and do that. But even as we look at foreclosures or being an investor, looking at our own business going, this is not working well. What am I going to do? And from there, we're going to move into something that's hopefully a little more optimistic and from a more of a business perspective on how we can really move forward. And with that, George, just on a person-to-person level, talk to us as an investor, somebody who's been investing for years, and you've gone through ups and downs. Share with us a little bit of that, if you would, please.
Sure, I appreciate that, Charles, and thanks for having me join this month's meeting. Sure. I'll tell you, I started investing in 1992, and I bought a 4-unit apartment building. I followed with a 19-unit apartment building, and within 10 years, I owned about 4,000 apartments across the country, and I was very hands-on. I would buy the most challenged properties and turn them around, and worked hard, and it had a lot of success as a result of that. Now, in 2004, on Christmas Eve, my largest holding, which was 1,100 units in Columbus, Ohio, was hit by an ice storm, the largest federally declared disaster in Ohio history, and it devastated the property and triggered this extraordinary sequence of events in which I lost everything and ended up $26 million in debt. And that was extremely, it was tough because I had always been, I had not always been successful, but I had consistent success. And when there was a setback, I usually was able to work through it. This was devastating. And I'll tell you what, one of the things that happened, because now I buy notes, and I have a company that not only buys notes but services notes for others, and we're a nationwide mortgage servicer, nationwide mortgage originator. But I from that experience, that my downfall, during that period of time, I started grinding my teeth, and just it manifested itself. The stress manifested itself in a lot of different ways. But I do remember something notable. One of my buildings, about 250 units in Oklahoma City, it was doing fine. Cash flow on the property was fine, but the loan matured, and because I had all these challenges at that point I had bad credit, I had judgments against me. I had a lot of challenges. What I did was, this particular, I wasn't able to refinance. So matured loan, fixed up property, now performing, and I was not able to refinance. And so the lender said, hey, we'll give you a 6-month extension. And I paid them an extension fee. I kept making my payments. And I was still, 6 months wasn't enough. I gave them another extension fee. They extended another 6 months, and I made all my monthly payments. But at the end of the second extension, they said, we're not going to be giving you any more extensions. We are going to appoint a receiver, and we are going to start foreclosure on the property. And that was, for me, who was clearly trying to work things out, it was frustrating. But I'll tell you what I did is I noticed that during the foreclosure process, that lender made a mistake. And I sued them, and I won. And in the end, they appealed it. And in the end, the Missouri Court of Appeals ruled that, because it was secured by property in Oklahoma and Missouri, ruled that the lender had inadvertently extinguished a $5.6 million debt, which was really a documentation error. And as a result, they couldn't collect it. And that was a big win for me. But what was really notable, and I think is telling, is I was willing to pay the debt. I had been paying the debt. It was completely current, and yet they weren't able to work with me. And this happens with homeowners when people buy a defaulted mortgage at a discount. Many a times, if it's in foreclosure, the majority of the times, actually the foreclosure is completed, the homeowner realizes they owe the money, and they do not fight it, and they just let it go. But some families are adamant about staying, as well they should. And they'll apply for a modification and whatnot. But if the lender refuses, and the homeowner's done everything that they should, then oftentimes they get an attorney, and they do everything they can to stay in their home. And if they find a mistake, they'll use that as leverage. And one of two things happen. One is either the lender will be paying attorney's fees, and the homeowner pays attorney's fees, really to no one's advantage. And once in a while, the attorney and the homeowner may find something that the lender did wrong, oftentimes completely inadvertently and not maliciously, but something that they did wrong that they can use as to big advantage. So my message at Note Expo to all these note investors was to try to find solutions for the families, and be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So when you buy these, there's huge opportunities. I think with the upcoming recession, there's going to be huge opportunities to buy defaulted mortgages at big discounts and then be in the position of the lender. And sometimes it's going to become REO, but sometimes there's an opportunity to help that family stay in their home and still make money. And what we did when we first started buying mortgages, I recognized that when I was on the debtor side, it was much easier if the lender came at me transparently. Basically, if they said, hey, you owe us $1 million, you got to pay us $1 million, and I don't have $1 million, and then it wasn't going to get paid. But what we did is we said, when we buy a mortgage, we're going to send out a letter to the homeowner, and we're going to say, hey, you owe us $100,000, but the house is now worth $50,000. We are going to offer you these 3 options. If you want to stay in the home, your payment was $800, your new payment can be $500, and you owe $8,000 in delinquent payments. We'll take $2,000 and we'll forgive the difference. And so if you want to stay, that's the option to take. On the other hand, if you don't want to stay, then we'll pay you $1,000 cash for keys in exchange for a deed in lieu. Or third option, home's worth 100. I'm sorry, you owe 100, the home's worth 50. We'll take 45 and we'll forgive the difference. So which do you want to do? We'd send this letter, and people would respond to it. They'd call us back, and it was like ordering off a McDonald's menu. They would say, hey, I'm calling, I want to do option number 1. I just got your letter, I want to do option number 3. And it made it really, it wasn't something where they had to go through a long application process. They had to, for us to review and decide what they could pay. We told them right up front, and they made their decision. And I think that transparency has fueled our success. In the last decade, we bought more than 10,000 mortgages across the country, and we've kept a lot of families in their homes. So that's really been the strategy that has been successful for us. And that is all a result of the challenges that I faced, and being on the debtor side, and realizing that going to a lender and saying, hey, I want to work this out, and they say, I want your tax returns, your bank statements, all these different documentation, so they can figure out how much you can afford. It was much easier to simply give them the best deal that you can up front and let them make the decision.
St. Anselm tells us that disasters teach us humility. And I think, especially when we're going into business, I recently saw a friend of mine who, multimillionaire, and because of difficulties, and suddenly he's sitting down with tons of attorneys, and his approach was a little different. He was a little more humble pie, but he's like, but I'm also thankful for the people who come around me. And we need to keep that in mind. And part of what we focus on at REIA is helping you build a team, and helping to put together a team that can, depending on what spot you are in life, what focus you have, what business model you have, and let's face it, models change depending on the economy. One of the things we looked at, and I think what George has with AHP, and Lori, if you can throw up the website for it, I appreciate it, the URL, so people can kind of look at that as well. This is one of those things that George has he's being humble about it right now, even saying, what's available through AHP. And George, how long has AHP been in business? How long have you had this company?
2008. We started in Cincinnati, which is where we had actually met before that, but you were helpful when we first got started there.
Yeah. And I wish you could have stayed here rather than going to Chicago, but Jane's lucky to have you there. So, and Jane, I encourage you to do a reach out right off the bat. But so AHP, and this is part of why I wanted to bring this to you, is first of all, they're buying tapes. So a lot of us go, I can't buy a tape from a bank of 10, 20, 2,000 mortgages. I can't do it. But if somebody else is already doing it, and this is the part that really intrigued me, George, was not only are you vetting it, the property, you're also vetting the note aspect of it, and then presenting a package each one individually. Go into that and explain that a little bit, if you would, please.
Yeah, sure. We one of the things from a business perspective I always thought was odd is that institutions will on a daily basis sell their REOs directly to real estate investors, oftentimes listed with agents or brokers on a one-off basis. But for notes, it usually goes from institution to institution. There's very few opportunities for a real estate investor to buy directly from an institution. So, and we talked to institutions, there were a number of reasons why, the prospect of selling 100 different loans to 100 different investors was not something that they were interested in. They thought 100 different know your customer checks, 100 different contracts, 100 different closings, just not worth it. And they just keep selling to institutions. So we came up with a site. It's preREO.com. And we found a solution to that problem. And what we did is we set up a trust, preREO trust, and we had US Bank as the trustee. And so what we do right now is an individual investor can bid on a particular mortgage on the site, and they're bidding on a mortgage that bid will go to the institution. The institution will either accept it, counter it, sometimes they reject them. But once a price is agreed to, then that loan is purchased into the trust, and the investor receives a participation agreement, which provides them delegated management authority to manage that particular mortgage or mortgages if they buy more than one, as well as all the economic benefits from that mortgage. But that has solved it, because now when an institution sells 100 loans, which are ending up under the control of 100 different investors, they're only facing one buyer, which effectively looks like an institution. It's US Bank Trust as trustee for preREO Trust. And so that was a solution that's worked. So now on a daily basis, investors are on preREO and they're bidding to buy a mortgage from an institution directly. And when it's sold through it's sold through the trust. And that has helped. It's not just helping now enabling the institutions to sell to investors, but there's been some other side benefits. About half the states in the country require a license to own or invest or own or enforce a mortgage, but they have exemptions if the loans are held in a trust with the national bank trustees. So investors who buy through preREO don't have to get those licenses. The other part is it actually gives us the ability to finance the mortgage purchases. People can pay cash, but if they want to finance, they can finance and put 25% down, and then preREO will finance 75%. So those have been really big benefits and have opened up note investing to a lot of different investors who have not done it in the past. And that's why we're excited with the prospect of, no one really wants to see a downturn or recession coming in the market, but it does present opportunities to acquire, in this case, to acquire distressed mortgages directly from institutions at big discounts.
So George, let's go back and unpack that, because you gave us a lot of information there. And AHP, American Home Ownership Preservation, oversees preREO, and preREO is a site where, as investors, we want to go to actually bid on these individual notes. And you said something there very quickly about a 75-25, and I want to bring that back so people hear that again, because my financing years perked up and went,
yeah, no. So let's say you're buying a mortgage for $100,000. You put up $25,000. We'll finance $75,000. And sometimes you're buying a mortgage for $20,000. You put up $5,000. We finance $15,000. Whatever the numbers are, we'll finance 75% of every purchase on the platform. And I see a question from the audience. Will we finance on notes that somebody already owns? And the answer to that is yes. We will. We can do cash out refinance if somebody already has a note and wants to get financing on it, or is buying a note that they found on their own. You can bring it to us and we'll finance it.
So again, there's already an issue for this. There's already a number of properties on here, but let's face it, we're at least 2 quarters in, maybe 3 quarters into recession. And I hear everything, and I'm sure you guys hear it as well, the range of doomsayers from the D word, depression, to, it's just going to be a real light, soft landing, which is what, Jay Powell wants us to believe. So we'll see. That's really the best thing. But with that in mind, especially as we're kind of, December is one of those kind of planning what we'll be doing next year and looking at things. I really wanted you guys to take a look at what George has here with pre-REO, because as foreclosures grow and notes are being sold, and George, if you want to kind of echo this point, or if I'm off base on this, a lot of banks got beat up. Oh, I mean, and rightfully so in some sense, from the housing foreclosures that happened during the housing recession of the 8s, 9s, 10s, and all that, in part because they weren't set up to handle it. And then when they did set up to handle it, they were just like, we don't care who you are, move it through, and it's going through. And there was a lot of non-support for them at the DC level and even at the state level. So there's a lot of banks who are reluctant to go there. So selling notes is a way for them to kind of push this off and not have to deal with it. And folks, is there anybody who's better at creative financing than our real estate investors? That's what we do. If we can't make this work, and especially when we got 75% financing going into the deal, we're missing a boat. So George, I mean, thoughts on that from, recession and the banks? Is this what we're going to see?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot. I mean, we have probably 600-700 notes on the platform. I know there's about another 500 that are being boarded next week. So and this is just the beginning of this downturn. And I don't know if people even call it a downturn right now, that may be a slowdown, but when we first started buying mortgages in 2010, there was just a massive oversupply, just thousands and thousands of mortgages out there for sale. And I'd expect the same thing. I mean, it's no different. It may happen a little in a little bit of a slower motion this time, but it is something where we expect there to be extraordinary opportunities coming up. And pre-REO, we really want to be the conduit so that it doesn't have to go from institution to institution. It can go from institution directly into the hands of real estate investors, who oftentimes are best equipped to work them out.
So let's go back to the letter you mentioned earlier, reaching out to individuals. Can you give some,
Yeah.
If I'm new to this note buying side of things, and I look at this and go, can you show me a little bit about what you do, how, kind of lift the curtain a little bit?
Yeah. So let me be clear. One of the things I did send, reach out to the homeowners. Now, the real estate investors cannot generally reach out to the homeowners. Usually it needs to be done, every state, it needs to be done by a licensed mortgage servicer. AHP Servicing will do the servicing for you. If you buy cash, you're welcome to use any other servicer. If it's financed, we need to retain the servicing. But those communications need to be done by a licensed servicer. But you can tell them, hey, this is a letter that I want sent, and we have a letter. We have that letter that we've used for a decade or more, which provides those options. And then we're phone calling, we're skip tracing, doing whatever we can to reach the homeowner and try to make a deal. That said, there's some homeowners who just refuse to talk, some homeowners who have passed away, homeowners who, for whatever reason, just don't care, and the home will just proceed through the foreclosure proceeding. But that is it. You'll be the one quarterbacking the servicer. So, for instance, if the homeowner does say, I want to do a mod, they come to you and you get to make the decision that, yes, I accept the mod, no, deny it, or I'll counter these terms. If there's a foreclosure sale scheduled, you get to decide, go ahead and let's bid at the full amount of the debt. No, let's bid less. And what do you want to do? And then if it's foreclosed upon, do you want to sell it as is? Do you want to keep it and fix it up and resell it or rent it? All decisions that you can make. And even actually, as long as once it goes REO, the financing can still stay in place until you refinance or sell the property. Anything up to 3 years. And somebody asked from the audience, from Rob, are these are non-performing notes? We have performing on the site too, but generally they're non-performing notes. They are pre-auction, and they don't always have a sale date. Once in a while you see sale date, you want such and such a date, but many a times it's could be months before the sale would actually happen. But notably, many hedge funds do not want to have an REO. So they sometimes are listing them on there because they've exhausted all opportunities to modify or deed in lieu or other option. And now they are, they don't want to deal with foreclosing, maybe evicting, and then listing with an agent. They will sell it. And we've had somewhere, I know one was actually sold on the day of the foreclosure sale, and the hedge fund knew it was a sale. They just said, just sell it. And that investor, it reverted to the lender, and they ended up getting the REO once the deed was processed, like 60 days later. So no, there are some that are pretty late stage foreclosure. Just as often, there's some that are very early stage or that are just being referred to foreclosure.
So there's a whole lot of support that your pre-REO is providing. It's not, I signed up and I bid on this and now I'm just out there alone on an island.
Yeah, we have a servicer that we can use, a law firm that will facilitate these legal actions across the country, and a trustee that helps on the that'll work with you on those that are in non-judicial foreclosure states. Remember, we're pretty up to 75%. So if you have we want you to succeed. We want our 75% back. So we have our interests are aligned in seeing you succeed, and we want you to do this again. We anticipate that there will be, again, I'm repeating myself in terms of an explosion of inventory, to the extent that you're successful, you keep coming back and you'll tell other people. And the more that we sell, the more that lenders give us. When we get 100 and we sell 30, that's not really that great. I need to get 100 on there, and I need to sell 90. And that will include like more rural areas, smaller markets, or maybe we don't have that many pre-REO investors yet, but we're trying to build it as much as possible so we get as much exposure. And again, the more that come through and sell, the more funds they'll give us.
Absolutely. So that's where I thought, from a partnership perspective, REIA leaders, this is one that, reach out to George. I'd encourage you to do that. Share this with your members. Again, I see the Youngs brothers on here, and we talk about, how do you hunt down and find, especially in a difficult market, properties. Here's one of the ways we wanted to bring this to you, to say, here's a good partnership, and doing it the right way, not just, we get accused enough of some of the problem things, and folks, this is the way we can do it right. Humanity and creativity together. And guess what? Still be profitable. Yes, profit is still a good word. We're not in business if we're not profitable. So let's just face that and go forward. So, but how do we do this and make it work? And we can work on this moving forward. So, George, I don't know if you've got any other questions coming in there, or thoughts or perspectives.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I can answer a couple quick questions from Rob. There's asking prices on all the mortgages on the site, but you can offer whatever you want. You could offer less, you can offer more. Bear in mind that many of the sellers are hedge funds who own mortgage notes across the country. You will, especially if you're local to the property that's securing the mortgage, you will pretty promptly know more about the local market and the property than they do. So if and many times they're basing their values on BPOs, which can be are not always accurate. So make the offer that you think is appropriate, that you think could be rewarding for you. Not to say the bank or the lender will agree with it, but almost always, if they don't, they'll counter it. So offer whatever you think is appropriate. And we'll be having we'll be having a large ongoing flow of notes soon. Yeah, I'd love to get Scott had a question. Please be able to reach out. That goes for anybody who has a question. You go to pre-REO, you can reach out, you can ask for me, and we will do everything we can to help you with your note journey.
Perfect. And like I say, we don't have a long presentation for you today, but I just encourage you to take a look at this. Take a look at pre-REO. Again, it's an opportunity, and everybody knows Zillow got out of the market. Redfin just recently got out of the market. We've talked about this in terms of there are institutional dollars that are out there that have been chasing the American single-family homeownership niche. And those have been monies coming in from around the world. And as the interest rates have changed, as numbers have gone up, a lot of that money was still pushing in. And now they're starting to go everything from institutional money that came in 17, 18, 19, and looking from anywhere from 3 to 5 year renewals on their commercial loans. They're going, oh, this isn't working for us now. So there's some of those institutional dollars that are going to be shifting out, and we're going to see SFRs come available. So I encourage you to participate, keep an eye on pre-REO, and if you have questions, get in touch with George. With that, George, any final comments?
No, I really appreciate, I mean, Charles and I have known each other for, I can say it's been a long time. It's probably 20 some years almost.
Like I said,
15 to 20 years.
We started.
Yeah, you weren't so great. And you didn't, and you also weren't Santa Claus, but now I see, you've aged well. This has, yeah, but it's great. It was a pleasure to find out, to reconnect with you, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share the opportunities at pre-REO.
With that, thank you very much, George, and wish everybody Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Rebecca, Ryan, transfer it back to you guys, and we'll go from there.
Rebecca, any last comments?
Other than Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Thanks so much for a wonderful 2022, and looking forward to 2023 with all of you.
Absolutely. We'll see you guys in January.